All right, guys, I've got a trio of Vienna games to share with you. Some reason I've been given the white pieces a lot today. So first game's against the 1200, then I've got one against the 1500, and the final one against an 1100, which goes right to the wire. So buckle in, and I really want to inspire you to try out this Vienna opening for yourself. So we've got e4, e5, and then the signature move of the Vienna, knight to c3. And in this first game, we have bishop c5, and I love to see this because this is the wayward queen line in the Vienna. You fire your queen straight out to h5. Now, according to the engine, this is actually the best move here. Okay, so clearly the threat here is capturing the pawn on e5. So pawn to g6 doesn't work, knight to f6 hitting the queen doesn't work. The queen will just grab the pawn with check and also harassing the bishop. So difficult situation. So we have d6 to defend the pawn, and now bishop to c4. Now we're threatening checkmate on f7 with the queen. So here g6 is pushed, and now the queen just drops back to f3. We've seen this situation many times in other videos. Still threatening mate on there. So now the knight comes out. Now d3. And d3 is preparing to bring the bishop out to here and pin the knight. Bishop might also come out here with ideas of going in there as well, which could make life difficult. And here, we have to watch out for this knight and watch out for, in particular, for threats. Now, looking at the knight here, if the knight comes into d5, right, we've got two attackers with knight and queen, but also with the threat of the bishop coming out here. Okay, now, bishop goes to d7. Now, this is a problem because, and it's a serious error, because the only additional, that we have a threat, very real threat of bishop g5, yeah? Now, if bishop g5 is played, how is the knight going to be defended? Because currently, so let's say bishop g5 comes out, we might also have knight coming in there as well. But if the bishop comes out here, right, the only defender of the knight right now is the queen. And black cannot actually summon up another defender, except for knight from b to d7. It's the only other defender that black can bring to back up that knight. But with this move, bishop d7, the only other defender is now blocked. The knight can't come to d7. So now bishop g5, and black is in trouble because the knight can't move because bishop takes queen. The knight can't move and attack white's queen because they're on opposite colours, so that's not going to work. So black here plays king to e7, which is bizarre. Now, I then missed a trick here because I captured with the bishop. And black actually resigns at this point because the queen's going to be lost anyway, and then we've also got the threat of queen coming down there and capturing on f7 anyway. However, the computer didn't like that because it said I should have captured with the queen. Because queen there, king can't capture, king can't move here, so the king has to move to there or there, and wherever the king goes, that would be checkmate. Okay, so again, lesson for me is to be spotting for those forced mates. Maybe I need to be doing more checkmate puzzles. Anyway, let's have a look at game number 2. So this is against a 15-12 rated opponent. Again, I've got the white pieces. Again, we have the Vienna. And this is a different one. So in the last game, the bishop came out here. Now this is the Zhuravlev counter gambit, apparently. So bishop's looking at the knight there, and the correct move here is bishop to c4. We have now c6, and this is quite an annoying move because this knight really wants to come in here and attack that square at some point in the future. So now I play d4, pawn takes, queen takes. So I have a lead in development. Also my queen now is looking at this pawn here. So we have bishop takes knight, and now queen takes, maintaining my trio of pawns here. I didn't really want to double up my pawns on the c file and isolate them. and the queen is still threatening g7. So now f6 is pushed. Probably not the best move. I think black could have achieved the same thing by bringing out the knight. That would have protected the pawn there, and it came with development and potential castling at some point in the future. So now I bring my bishop out to f4, putting it on this diagonal. So I'm in a position there where I could actually take out both knights if I want to give up my bishops, but looking at the board, it's a bishopy board. We don't really want to be doing that. Okay, queen now comes to e7 in front of the king. Okay, so now I decide to castle long, bringing this rook into play immediately. Now this pawn might be seem to be hanging, but the queen can't take, because then rook e1 is defended by my queen and the black queen would be lost. So instead we have b5 hitting the bishop, and now I decide to sack my bishop. Okay, but it's not really a sacrifice, because if the pawn takes, queen takes the bishop on c8 with check, right? And then the queen will have to block, probably. We'll trade queens, king has to move. Black's in a poor position, so the bishop now moves. I move my bishop, looking again at this knight on g8. Now a5 is played. Slightly dubious pawn move, maybe. So let's see how we continue the attack. Knight to f3, connects the rooks, gets this rook ready to come into the middle. We really want a rook on the e-file if a king and queen are both there. Then we want to just punch through in the middle. Queen now moves to c4, but that's a blunder. Can you see the tactic? What does this enable? Always need to be very careful about putting your queen in a position where it could have a discovery, particularly if the piece can move with check. Okay, so in check, discovered attack on the queen is going to fall. Now knight comes out with an attack. I can ignore that because I have a check with a rook, grabbing a pawn, and now queen to f5 is checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. Okay, didn't actually realize it was checkmate when I made the move. I knew it was check, but again, just need to sharpen up those spider senses. All right, let's move on to game number 3. This is the longer one. And my opponent's here rated only 11-13. And we have the Vienna. Wayward queen attack. d6. Bishop out here, of course, now threatening mate. Now, this is an interesting one. This is one response. Knight to h6 defends the pawn. Okay, and d3 now creates a discovered attack against the knight. And here my opponent plays the quite natural queen to f6. Now he's now threatening queen takes f2. Okay, so I block that with my knight on f3, and this is a really interesting little move. Bishop to g4. It's hitting the queen, also hitting the knight. And so my only real move here is actually, well, I've got two. I could put my queen here or here, both of them defended by the knight. So I move my queen to h4 and we have a trade of queens. Now the bishop comes back. So what do? Do we exchange bishops, which really opens up the king side, but black may still castle that way. I decide to go for the exchange. Now I just push a3, just preventing the bishop from coming here and pinning my knight. And the knight now comes in to attack f2. So what do? We castle. Pretty straightforward. Now black's king engages, comes off the back rank, preparing, once the knight develops, the rooks will be mobile. I now push h3 and kick the knight back. Now b4 to kick the bishop. Bishop comes forwards though and pins my knight against the rook. So bishop to d2, completes development, defends the knight, and now this rook is free to move. Well, in fact, the knight was undefended anyway, so it just simply defends the knight. Knight now develops to c6. Now I bring my knight back off the edge of the board where it's not going to be very useful, and attack the bishop here. Key question, do we want to keep bishops or do we want to keep knights on the board? And it's really not clear at this point. Rook comes across. I now get my rook out of the pin with rook a to c1. Now this knight can move. And black here decides to trade his dark squared bishop for my knight. considering that all the pawns are still on the board, that's it seems like a reasonable move here at this point. Now, at this time, material is equal. I have a bishop and a knight. Black has 2 knights. h6 is pushed, and now this is an error on my part. I decide that it's probably worth trying to break through in the middle because Black's king is uncastled and in the middle of the board. But I've got a dark squared bishop, right? My pawns are actually quite safe here in this light squared pawn chain. But with this, I simply undefend the pawn on e4. Okay, we have pawn takes and knight takes and knight takes and bishop takes. Okay, now here Black could actually have simply captured the pawn, but instead kicks the bishop, and I can't capture on a7 because b6 will be pushed, and then when the rook comes across, the bishop will be trapped. So you've always got to be careful about capturing on the A and H file. So I drop my bishop right back here to b1, where it's defended by the rook. And now the knight grabs the pawn. So I'm a pawn down. Kick the knight. Knight comes in attacking the rook. Rook to d1. In line with the king. Does make some sense. So should this knight move, this pawn could actually be captured because its only defender would actually be pinned. So the knight moves. I move my rook back to e1 now. And I've blundered another pawn. So I'm 2 pawns down. Not good. Now rook c comes to d1, so I've centralized my rooks on these 2 semi-open files that are occupied only by black pawns. So the king starts to advance. Now I lift my rook to d1, protecting this pawn. We have g5, and the bishop now flies out to d4. Pawn cannot capture because it's pinned by my rook. Still can't capture on a7 though. But b6 is pushed anyway. Now I bring my bishop back round here. So just bringing it around my king, also protecting this square, which might turn out to be useful. Knight comes out to hit the rook, rook across to e2. Now we have a5, and I'm starting to think he might have me here. He's got a pawn majority. So I take and knight takes. Now, rook to a1, hitting the knight. And I'm threatening to come in here, maybe capture that pawn as well. So the knight now moves back where it's defending the a7 square. So my rook can't just jump straight in. So I bring my rook back across to b1. And I'm thinking there may be ideas here of bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, maybe hitting the knight, but I'm still 2 pawns behind. So probably don't want to be losing material or giving material away there. So we have d5. Now I push c3, just preventing the knight from coming forwards even more. Now the king moves. Okay, and the game is actually over in the next few moves, okay? Because I push g4, and here, serious mistake. King moves forwards to f4. Now, black is in a good position in this game, right? Got both rooks are mobile. He's got 2 pawns advantage. So here we've got a 3 against 1 on B, C, and D. So that's what he should be thinking about. He should be thinking about bringing the king back here, bringing rooks behind the pawns, and just simply pushing forwards and rolling through. Okay, but this is a mistake because you've always got to say to yourself, okay, how many squares has my king got here, right? Now the king can't retreat to that square because the pawn is covering it. Can't go to either of these 2 squares covered by pawn and rook. Okay, so now I simply play king g2, and here, how does black prevent checkmate with bishop to g3? I really don't know. Even pushing the pawn here I don't think would work. So very, very bad situation now for black. He pushes a pawn too late. He took his eye off the ball and he forgot the first 2 rules of chess club. Is my king safe? Is my king really safe? Are the first 2 rules. Okay, so black here actually threw away a very strong position. but very satisfying checkmate there. So yeah, 3 games in the Vienna, 3 good fun games. I need to keep an eye out for my leaving pieces hanging, of course, but still in love with this opening, and I'm just going to keep the videos coming if you guys don't mind more Vienna games, because they're just so much fun. All right, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.